Welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. This week, Sweden and Finland both announced they will be joining NATO. The Swedish Prime Minister says the country has to do what is right for it. And the Finnish president says he spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin on the country's decision. Until now, both countries had been neutral on a NATO membership. Plus, remember the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, when the United States and the Soviet Union nearly came to a nuclear war? Experts before the war in Ukraine had drawn references from there, but are there similarities? Our special interview this week is with the Nigerian ambassador to Cuba with accreditation to the Bahamas, Nicaragua and Honduras, Ambassador Ben Okoye. He tells us there are similarities, but Cuba is choosing to remain neutral about the war in Ukraine. That's Diplomatic Channel in a wrap. Let's check in on those other discussions in diplomatic circles. We'll be right back. The Nigerian government has commiserated with the family, people and government of the United Arab Emirates over the death of President Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan. A statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs described the leader as visionary and one who would be remembered for his contributions to the economic development of the United Arab Emirates. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron was in the UAE on Sunday to offer condolences to the UAE's new leader, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, on the death of his half-brother, President Khalifa bin Zayed, in a show of support to a key regional player. Sheikh Mohammed, now ruler of the wealthy Abu Dhabi Emirate, steered the Western Allied Gulf state for years before being named the UAE's third president by a federal Supreme Council on Saturday. President Macron, whose country holds lucrative business and military ties with the UAE, told Sheikh Mohammed that the UAE could count on France's friendship and discussed the Ukraine conflict. Several Arab leaders paid respect on Saturday, but Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince, whose father, King Salman, entered hospital a week ago, sent a delegation. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the United Nations is in contact with Ukrainian and Russian authorities to evacuate more civilians from Ukraine. He made the comments at a press conference with the Austrian Chancellor Karl Nehammer in Vienna. Mr. Guterres says he is deeply concerned about hunger becoming widespread in different parts of the world due to food shortages in the wake of the war in Ukraine.
We are in contact with the Austrian, with the Ukrainian and the Russian authorities in order to multiply the initiatives similar to this. These contacts are going on. Our policy was, if you remember, we only announced each of the evacuations after it was completed. So we will do more operations of the same kind, I'm sure, but we will keep them not public until they are completed, as we have done with the Mariupol operation. If you want to solve a problem, you need to deal with those that cause the problem or that can solve the problem. So it makes full sense to talk to the leader of the Russian Federation. It makes full sense to talk to any other relevant actors in the present crisis. I have to say that I'm deeply concerned, namely with the risks of hunger becoming widespread in different parts of the world because of the dramatic food security situation we are facing because of the war in Ukraine.
Finally, the G7 says it would provide military equipment to Ukraine on a long-term basis if necessary. After a 3-day meeting of the G7 foreign ministers in Wangels, Germany, the group made a joint statement on the ongoing Ukraine crisis, saying if necessary, it would provide Ukraine with sustained military equipment for years to come. A day earlier, EU High Representative of Foreign Affairs and Security Policy Josep Borrell who also attended the meeting, announced a further €500 million worth of military aid to Ukraine. However, no agreement was reached between G7 members on whether frozen Russian assets should be used to rebuild Ukraine. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said after the meeting that differences are inevitable, and even the EU members in the G7 cannot hold exactly the same position on every issue. Welcome back. NATO says it has its eyes on Russia. Should it carry out any attacks on NATO countries following Sweden and Finland's decision to join the military alliance? Our countries say their actions are in their best interests and have nothing to do with provoking Russia.
Welcome to this press conference after...
It's been described as a historic moment by NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg as he reacted to news that Sweden and Finland had decided to join the Western military alliance.
If they decide to apply, this would be an historic moment. Their membership in NATO would increase our shared security, demonstrate that NATO's door is open and that aggression does not pay.
Ministers in the alliance had met on Sunday before the announcement to discuss the new memberships. Even before the announcement, NATO was confident of overcoming objections by Turkey and quickly admitted Finland and Sweden. Turkey had laid out demands before a potential NATO membership of Finland and Sweden could take place. Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu had said that both must stop supporting terrorist groups in their countries, provide clear security guarantees and lift export bans on Turkey. He singled out Sweden in particular, saying that the Kurdish militant group, the PKK, banned as terrorists by the United States and European Union, had held meetings in Stockholm over the weekend. Turkey's concerns are expected to pose an obstacle as any decision on NATO's enlargement requires unanimous approval by all 30 member states.
Turkey is an important ally. Turkey has expressed some concerns, and as we always do in NATO, when there are concerns, when there are questions, we sit down, and I'm confident that we will be able to find a common ground, an agreement, consensus on how to move on the membership issue.
By Sunday afternoon, Finnish President Sauli Niinisto confirmed his country will apply for membership of the NATO alliance in a historic policy shift prompted by the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
We have reached today an important decision in good cooperation between the government and the President of the Republic. We hope that the Parliament will confirm the decision to apply for NATO membership during the coming days.
President Niinisto and Prime Minister Sanna Marin on Thursday said they both favoured NATO membership, giving a green light for the country to apply. The president said he had even had a talk with Russian President Vladimir Putin over his decision. He also expressed his readiness to hold talks with his Turkish counterpart Tayyip Erdogan after Ankara raised objections to the Nordic countries' membership.
What we heard 2 days ago was different. Then yesterday we again heard that Turkey is open to our membership, but it turned back to no, or let's say negative side. I think that what we need now is a very clear answer. I'm prepared to have a new discussion with President Erdogan about the problems he has raised.
Hours later, the Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson announced her country's decision as well.
Today, the Social Democratic Party has concluded that Sweden should join NATO. Our 200-year-long standing policy of military non-alignment has served Sweden well. But the issue at hand is whether military non-alignment will keep serving as well. And Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine is not only illegal and indefensible, it also undermines the European security order that Sweden builds its security on.
Meanwhile, Russia has suspended electricity supplies to Finland due to non-payment from the country since May the 6th. Electricity imports from Russia accounts for about 10% of Finland's power needs. But the suspension will not cause power shortage to the country for now, as Finland could fill the gap by increasing imports from Sweden and domestic generation.
Now to our feature. Ambassador Ben Okoye began his career as a diplomat when he was appointed Nigeria's Consul General to New York. His good work there went ahead of him, so it was no surprise he was given a new assignment to head the 4 missions in the Americas and the Caribbean: Cuba, the Bahamas, Nicaragua, and Honduras. I had a chat with him from his office in Havana, Cuba, about Nigeria-Cuba relations and what Cubans make of the war in Ukraine, they themselves having nearly gone through an almost similar situation in 1962. I have joining me now Nigeria's ambassador to Cuba with accreditation to Honduras, the Bahamas, and Nicaragua. Ambassador Ben Okoye, thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you for having me on your platform.
And you are currently in Havana, so we'll be talking about Cuba today. Ambassador, the last time I had you on this show, you were preparing to take up a new assignment, well, your new assignment, and you've been there almost a year. July, I think, will be 1 year since you took office. How has the journey been so far?
Well, the journey has been good and engaging. Actually, I'd already made 1 year. I arrived in Cuba last year, April.
Okay. And then how would you describe Nigeria-Cuba relations at the moment?
It's been excellent. Nigeria has maintained excellent link historically since we established diplomatic relations with Cuba in 1974. We shared national objectives, and particularly on the African continent. We had maintained good political and diplomatic relations, and in the area of health, biotechnology, and scientific research. We also have a very visible Yoruba and Efik community in Cuba, and therefore culture and tourism is another area of engagement we have. We recall in the year 2000, our former president Obasanjo commissioned the Yoruba House in Old Havana. And every year we have a request by Cubans wanting to travel to Nigeria to perform their yearly religious festival of Osun Osogbo Religious Festival. This is a very popular among the Cubans as we speak. We are also working very hard to establish a direct air transport link, just to link up the Caribbeans with the African continent for direct and easy movement of the both continents. I can say so far it's been engaging and very excellent.
Yeah, and you resumed your duties in Cuba during the pandemic. Did that hamper some of your objectives for the relations between both countries?
Well, the pandemic, as you know, affected the entire world, no doubt. Has also affected diplomatic engagement due to the restrictions. And I remember when I arrived here, we were still working from house, and there's no much of visits of establishments and the government. So that really affected our engagement at the time, particularly when we also know that Cuba is also affected by the U.S. Economic sanctions. So that is an additional burden at the time, So, but then all of this is gradually fading out in terms of the pandemic. So we are adjusting and settling quickly.
Our conversation with Ambassador Okoye continues after the break. Stay with us. Ambassador, you already know the world is currently faced with the war going on in Ukraine and the impact of it globally. But before we talk about that, so how it's been impacting on Cuba, many were trying to compare circumstances of the Cuban-Russian crisis, missile crisis, with the Russia-Ukraine standoff even before the war. And some even said Russia would not invade Ukraine at that point. Now we know better. What were the kinds of conversations going on in Cuba before the Russian invasion of Ukraine as people flashed back to that Cuban missile crisis?
Well, the kind of conversations that goes on in Cuba was not very, very clear because the government position seems to be more clearer. The government was on the view that a peaceful resolution to those crises were more important. Cuba was not seen to be taking any side in this war that was going on, even though we know the relationship they have both to the Russians and to the Ukrainians. So this is the situation we see here, and not much is clear to be analyzed concerning the war on the streets, but government position was very clear in terms of advocating for peaceful resolution to the crisis in Ukraine.
Yeah, did you find any similarities of the two situations? The situation in which the U.S. and Russia nearly went to war in 1962 over the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the kinds of heated tension between Russia, Ukraine, and NATO and the United States just before Russia invaded Ukraine?
Well, I can say that the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962 was a direct and a very dangerous confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union at then, during the Cold War, and this was a moment when the two superpowers came closest to the nuclear conflict, and the cost-benefit analysis, from both ends, resolved the crisis, and no shot was fired. But in the case of Ukraine, we're not talking about two superpowers, and although overriding the national interest is regulating or dictating the behavior of Russia at this point in time in terms of security and sovereignty around within their environment. But in terms of the threats is almost the same, but because we're talking about the threat for nuclear war and the effect it will bring. But already, everywhere is beginning to face the effects of the war that is taking place in Ukraine. In terms of similarity, I can say that the effect that is on the wall, was much in the case of Russia-Ukraine crisis than what happened in 1962.
What do Cubans make of the war in Ukraine? What do they think about Russia's invasion?
Well, like I mentioned, the Cubans' interaction on the crisis is not visible on the streets, except the effects of food supply and basic necessities of life. Those are the things. But the much talk is within the diplomatic community, analyzing the effect, the options, and the responses countries need to maybe make at this point in time in terms of getting alternative supply of gas, fuel, and all of those issues. And the question about nation sovereignty and all of those things. So basically, the conversation within the diplomatic community around issues about international politics and not necessarily on the street on discussion that has to do with the Cubans.
I asked that question because I've heard certain sources say that Cubans tend to believe what the Russian government is putting out there, probably because of the agreements that were signed between Russia and the Soviet Union, beg your pardon, and Cuba back then after the missile crisis. But at some point in this war, Ambassador, there was speculation Russia was going to use nuclear weapons. You've rightly mentioned that. And it even threatened to use nuclear weapons. I know you've been only a year in the country, but would you describe Cuba relations, how would you describe Cuba-Russia relations as an observer?
Well, the Cuban-Russia relationship is very excellent, as we observe from this as an observer. Cuba relies so much on Russia in terms of tourism, in terms of food supply, and political relationship, and all of that. So it's very excellent. So this war is actually affecting Cuba because most of the tourists that comes to the island are coming from Russia mainly, and you can expect that the restrictions in terms of transportation, flight movement, and all that is already affecting the island, and that alone is something that's not too good for the Cuban government. But at the other point, Cuba is not good. The Cuban government is also not coming openly against or condemning the war, because they also have a relationship with Ukraine. Cuba at the time also had undertaken a medical mission of mercy in Ukraine after the meltdown of a reactor at the nuclear plant in the 90s that affected hundreds of thousands of people who needed medical care at a time where Ukraine was unable to treat these patients. Almost about 23,000 young people who were treated and lived in Cuba. So Ukraine also have a special relationship with Cuba. So probably that is the reason why Cuba may not come up openly. The other angle to look at is also remembering what happened in the missile crisis. I don't think it would be difficult to think that Cuba government would favor military alliance with Russia just to fight other nations at this point in time because of counting from history. I think that's more reason why they favor a situation where peaceful resolution should be encouraged.
And that's when everyone else wants a peaceful resolution to the war in Ukraine. Ambassador, finally, what do Nigerians there, following the political events back home? We're just months away from our general elections in February. The Senate rejected the bill in March about, diaspora voting, and I know that upset a lot of Nigerians outside the country. What do the ones in Cuba think, about not being able to participate in the elections next year, and how are they processing what's going on here in Nigeria, the political landscape?
Well, every diaspora will always want to be interested in what happened back home, particularly because they will always go home at any point in time. So what happened at home is very important. Of course, in a political era, everyone is beginning to watch and begin to listen to the conversation going on as to know who to vote for, who to support, and all of that. This is very normal. And I do think that it's an interesting time for people to really analyze what is going on back home. And with time, I think that the diaspora voting rights will be established, and every Nigerian, wherever they are living in the planet of the earth, will be able to take part in the activities of Nigeria, particularly when it comes to voting rights. I think it's a positive development that our democracy is enforced, and we are looking forward to another change of government come May 2023.
Ambassador Okoye, thank you again for speaking with me. I wish you all the best in Cuba, in Honduras, Nicaragua, and in the Bahamas.
Thank you very much for inviting me again on this platform.
This is where we end the program today. Do check out our other editions online at youtube.com/channelsweb. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.